These are the comics that will inspire the new Superman movie. Recently, Superman's official Instagram account published a post that read as follows: "Are you looking forward to Superman Legacy? So are we. Read the comics that inspired the new movie." This post had 3 comic book covers: All-Star Superman, which is the comic that James Gunn had long revealed would inspire his film, and 2 comics that hadn't been mentioned until now, Superman Birthright and Superman Brainiac. And I don't like to brag, but, well, I do like to brag. And so I will tell you that Birthright and Brainiac are the 2 comics that I had mentioned a few months ago that could serve as inspiration for the Superman Legacy movie, since Gunn couldn't take many parts of the plot from All-Star Superman. Just hire me already, Warner. But hey, these stories are very different. What are you going to take from each? As I mentioned, All-Star Superman is the comic that Gunn has mentioned from the beginning when he talks about his Superman Legacy movie. And I get it because a lot of people think this is the best comic in Superman history. I think so too, which raises a lot of hype. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to take inspiration from the plot of this comic for the new movie. This because All-Star Superman tells you about the last year of the Man of Steel's life, the trials he has to overcome, and the preparations he has to make so that humanity can go on without him. And well, this sounds epic to close a trilogy, for example. But not for the first movie. So, well, what is it that James Gunn will take from this comic? I'm sure he will take the personality of this Superman, since here he is presented as this beacon of goodness and hope who gives his all for the world, even when death is imminent for him, rescues distant galaxies, gives second chances to his adversaries, and even takes the time to save and instill hope in some people. Because this Superman understands that individual battles are also extremely important, as we humans often yearn to be rescued from the pain we find ourselves in and on. These occasions, a few words of encouragement are worth more than the ability to be more powerful than a locomotive. Having said that, I don't think I take the personality of this Clark Kent. This is because here he looks very much like the version we saw played by Christopher Reeve in the movies. That is, a Clark who always pretends to be clumsy, shy, and even a little cowardly in order to safeguard his secret. And this is a very classic approach to Superman, but this Clark Kent of extreme clumsiness is something that I personally don't like so much anymore. I think it's one of those elements that works very well in certain stories, but I'm not sure it's right for a movie today, and there are more modern interpretations that give us other options. In the classic Superman stories, this Clark Kent we see in the Daily Planet is a fake personality designed so that no one suspects that Clark and Superman are the same person. At this point, Superman is the real person, and Clark the mask. Other more recent versions tell us that Clark is the personality that has always existed. And yes, this is someone who is shy, kind, and a bit withdrawn socially, because he has always felt different from others. But it doesn't get to this point that we saw in Reeve's interpretation. Think of something more like the version we saw in Smallville. In those stories, Superman is the mask and Clark the real person. However, there is a third option that I think is the correct one. There are some stories where there is a Clark Kent from Smallville who is the real person, and he has to create 2 new, slightly different personalities in order to keep his secret safe. One a little more awkward to show his new friends in Metropolis, and the other a little more heroic to present himself as Superman to the world. Something similar to what we saw in the Birthright comic, which has just been confirmed as one of the comics that will inspire the new movie. If you look at different stories that play with different concepts of what the real personality is, which one do you like the most? Another point that I think they're going to pick up on has to do with a little-known power of Superman, but that ties these 2 stories together: All-Star Superman and Birthright. You probably know that Superman has X-ray and telescopic vision. However, the power of his gaze goes far beyond that, as he is able to see people's souls, or something very similar. In Birthright, we are told that one of the reasons Superman saves people is because he can see that every living thing emits a kind of colored light which goes out the moment we die. And he says that that moment when our light goes out is a very painful thing for him to see. This is very much like the ability he has in All-Star Superman, in which he is able to see that we are all connected through a web of energy, and that the actions of one directly impact everyone else. And when you're able to see that your actions have an impact on all living things, I guess you see the world in a different way. In fact, that's how he finally defeated Lex Luthor in this comic, by making him see that the most logical way to live is to take care of each other, something Lex learns in this comic. This is a detail that has never been seen outside the comics, and it would be great if they used it for Superman Legacy, because it makes this myth of this super powerful person who is always willing to do good a little more credible for modern audiences. These are some of the qualities that actor David Corenswet's Superman is sure to have, as we've been told that we'll see a more classic, less emo version of the Man of Steel. I'm not familiar with his work, but there are a couple of details that really stand out to me. The first is that he looks like a younger version of Henry Cavill, which I don't think is a coincidence. Maybe what Barry did at the end of Flashpoint was to give us a younger Superman that never faced Zod, and therefore didn't have this ending either. And bringing in David Corenswet works to make the transition from one Superman actor to another a little smoother. But even though Superman is one of the most important elements of the plot of Superman, there are other characters who are also very important in the Man of Steel mythos. One of them is Lois Lane, and here is an excellent opportunity to make the character shine, because I was never that big a fan of Amy Adams. While Adams' Lois Lane was very good at bringing Superman up to speed on the political consequences of his actions, I always felt that there were certain traits of Lois Lane's personality that I never saw in her. I don't know if it happened to you, or it was just my perception. In this case, the new Lois Lane will be actress Rachel Brosnahan, who became famous for leading the series The Wonderful Miss Maisel. But hey, what do I think the new Lois Lane should look like? On occasion, Superman has described Lois Lane as the most human person he has ever seen in his life. She is strong, brave, and above all fierce when it comes to denouncing the injustices of the world. She is kind to people, but rude to those who deserve it. She detests people who abuse their power, and perhaps that is why in some versions, she distrusts Superman at first. I mean, who could trust the man who can do anything to be able to do good in such a selfless way? In the stories, Lois functions as a sort of counterbalance to the Superman equation. She is the human essence in a world of powers, and the realistic approach that levels Superman's often over-the-top optimism. I think Lois is my favorite female character in all of comics. She strikes me as Superman's ideal partner. In the old days, she was presented as a woman who would do anything to learn Superman's secret identity and marry him. But modern approaches present us with a more interesting perspective. Lois is a relentless force for good in her own right, a reporter who is capable of anything to expose the truth. And I think this will be the hardest thing for Rachel Brosnahan to do, having to balance this gentle and human side with that of this shrewd and fearless journalist who is even capable of standing up to Lex Luthor himself. And while we're on the subject of Lex Luthor, it turns out that his character is already confirmed for Superman Legacy. No official casting has been announced for him, although some options circulating were Nicholas Hoult, Bill Skarsgård, and Alexander Skarsgård. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until the end of the writers and actors strike to get official casting. But hey, some people think it's too soon to have another Lex Luthor on film. I mean, doesn't Superman have other villains to explore that we haven't seen in the movies? And yes, that's true. But it's also true that Lex doesn't simply function as the antagonist of a story, but rather this character functions as the antagonist, the adversary, the one who opposes the mere existence of the Man of Steel. And the fact is that in the Superman myths, Lex is as important a character as Lois Lane. It is this figure who is not always the central villain, but always seems to have a weight and influence on the more corrupt side of Metropolis. He considers himself to be the most outstanding human being, and the fact that there is a person, like Superman, who manages to outshine him is something he definitely cannot tolerate. This is about the most intelligent human being a victim of his own emotions, a person who could be as beneficial as Superman, but is corrupted by his arrogance. Having said that, he will certainly not be the central antagonist of the film, and it was confirmed that another comic they would use as inspiration would be this one that has Brainiac as the central antagonist, which surely means that Brainiac will be the main threat, while Lex will take more this role of the antagonist who is in the background and manipulates the circumstances so that people turn against the Man of Steel. And there are still a lot of unexplored aspects of Lex Luthor in the movies. These are the ones that I think they will explore. The first point that has never been seen in a Superman movie, and actually appears in Birthright, is the friendly relationship that Lex and Clark had in Smallville. Which makes a lot of sense because these were two people with special gifts who felt alienated and alone because these very gifts made them different from the rest of the population. And this is extremely interesting to me because it tells us about two ways of dealing with the same problem, and two different paths that these two friends followed. In Superman's case, he used his gifts to make a positive difference in the world and help humanity. Meanwhile, Lex Luthor further emphasized these differences in order to feel superior to the rest of the population and let them know his superiority whenever he can. Another point that they are surely going to adapt is this charisma that Lex Luthor has. Jesse Eisenberg's version was that of a genius who was strange and socially awkward, but I would love it if they would now take up this version that we haven't seen of Lex Luthor in the movies, who knows how to talk to the media, when to smile, and when not to smile. What I want to see is a Lex Luthor who uses this post-truth phenomenon to manipulate a section of the population, despite all the evidence being against him. In fact, in Birthright he does something very similar, and manipulates public opinion to make them feel xenophobic towards Superman. And just like in this comic, I think Brainiac's intention will be to assimilate human knowledge and then destroy our world. Something that will probably be linked to the theme of artificial intelligences. Because remember that superheroes have a tendency to confront social fears. Brainiac believes that humanity is simple data that can be stored, emulated, and replicated. But the point of the film will be to make us see that there is a human component beyond this data. And the interesting thing will be to see how Superman, someone who is not a human being, the last son of Krypton, makes Brainiac see this because humanity transcends your place of origin. By the way, don't be surprised that Lex Luthor helped Superman defeat Brainiac at the last minute, just to make the audience believe he's on the side of good. So, up to here, we already have a movie that talks a little bit about xenophobia and artificial intelligences, which seem to be two different topics, but I think there is an excellent way to combine them. So, taking into account the comics confirmed as inspiration for Superman Legacy, I think this will be the central point of the film. Or if not, modesty aside, I think it should. Lex Luthor will manipulate public opinion to make people think that Superman can't be trusted because he's not a human being, just as we saw in Birthright. Brainiac, on the other hand, who will be the central antagonist, will believe that humanity is emulatable and replicable, and Superman, the last son of Krypton, will show him that there is a human component that transcends the data that can be emulated with artificial intelligence, that the essential component of the human being is not found in the place where we are born, or in the set of knowledge we have. In this case, both Superman and Lex would speak to the virtues of humanity, but they would have completely different approaches and consequences. If you look at Lex's case, it's closer to a fascist discourse. So you'd have a film that brings these three characters together, touches on important issues like xenophobia and artificial intelligences, and presents them to you through a concept that would make the film feel solid, like it all adds up. Finally, another of the other big announcements that were made had to do with the casting of the following characters: Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, and Metamorpho. But well, who are the new characters confirmed for Superman Legacy? Guy Gardner is one of the most classic Green Lanterns, and has acted on many occasions as a stand-in for Hal Jordan. He has the particularity of having a mocking and arrogant attitude, but also an undeniable heroism and loyalty. One of his top moments in the comics was when Batman knocked him out with a punch. Mr. Terrific is one of the most intelligent human beings in the world, and has the ability to become an expert at basically anything, be it physical or mental abilities. He once said that he had a natural aptitude for having natural aptitude. The Hawkgirl we will see is Kendra Saunders, a Latina woman who has the soul of Shira Hall, the original Hawkgirl, and possesses basically the same powers, such as the ability to reincarnate, fly, and enhanced strength. Finally, Metamorpho is a very strange hero, who has the ability to transform his body into different elements and materials, from gases to kryptonite. The question now is, how do they fit in a Superman movie? These characters are representative members of various superhero teams that have not been very popular outside of comics. For example, Metamorpho is a classic member of the Outsiders, Guy Gardner of the Justice League International, and Mr. Terrific and Hawkgirl of the JSA. I believe James Gunn is going to bring together elements from all of these groups and combine them into one. My prediction is that they will be Terrifics or something similar, since Gunn once tweeted their image, and they will be a group that is not entirely sure if Superman can be seen as a benevolent force, not because they believe he is evil, but because the consequences of his actions can be negative without him knowing it. Likewise, I don't think these characters will have much weight in the film. That is, they are going to introduce us to this group, but they are going to be careful that they don't consume too much time. Rather, I think their inclusion will be brief. But it will serve to let us know that the world in which this Superman operates is one in which many metahumans inhabit, and not all of them have similar ideas of how to do good. I also believe that his inclusion is because Gunn is comfortable working with ensembles of actors, with different small characters that he can change and assemble at will to create a unit much greater than the sum of its parts, as happened with Guardians of the Galaxy. To this point, I think James Gunn has good elements, and I really like the comic book choices he chose as inspiration.
Those were the comics you wanted.
Details. Now all that's left to do is cross our fingers that we get a great Superman movie. Superman and that DC Comics finally gets that win that many of us have been waiting for.